Thank you, Josh. Thanks a lot for joining this. This is one of our early episodes of Wolf's Byte podcast, and I'm really happy to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself and what you do at Best Branding Solutions?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for reaching out and thank you for having me here today. With Best Branding Solutions, my wife and I formed this organization, this business, a few years back, and I'm the president and creative director, but primarily take on the role of let's say creative director. And so with that, we've kind of been working with a handful of organizations over the last few years, ranging all sorts of different types of industries, where we've switched up our niche just a little bit. Still, available to work with a multitude of organizations, but we're finding a nice little nice little area here within personal branding, and have been able to help out. My wife has a big network on LinkedIn. I'm working on it. And with that said, we've been able to make some really good connections and hopefully are transitioning a little bit more into the personal branding side. But I just love design so much that it's going to be hard for me not to just work with anybody that reaches out. In addition to my work with Best Branding, I'm an educator. I work at a small college here in North Carolina. And additionally, I do concert photography, so photojournalism, and really any photography, event photography that I can get my hands on. But again, I just love visual communication. And so Best Branding has really given me an opportunity to focus on helping clients particularly, and just helping me to just make things. I just love making things.
That's amazing. You're a creative guy overall. I can feel your passion from the way you just talked about it, and it's amazing. That's great. So how do you approach design and creativity? You said you do photography. You said you're into multiple creative stuff, or personal branding, and then there's branding and design in itself. So what is your approach to design? I know there are plenty of textbook methodologies that we talk about, but what actually does happen in the business?
Well, no matter. Depending on where I'm working in, it really comes down to research. I feel like that's kind of an easy answer, but it's one that I kind of learned the hard lesson. Back in school, when I was in college, and I try to remember back to those days from time to time. You just wanted to just make it. Like, okay, we're having a logo project. Well, I'm going to make a logo. Boom, I've made a logo. But again, learning the hard lesson that just making something is not always the best answer. You may think it looks great. It may be awesome work. But if it doesn't answer the client's, problem, then it's not really worth its weight. It's not doing any good. So research is always the first step that I take as it relates to understanding the client, understanding who they want to speak to, getting a feel for their overall vibe, so that when it comes time to, do the design, choosing the typography, choosing the color, you know what to look for. You can kind of help target a bit more of what it is that you're going to be working with. But again, I know I said it's kind of an easy answer to go to, but I do feel like, especially with junior designers, newer designers, it's a step that they really want to skip from time to time.
They just want to use a template and iterate the logo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's definitely and honestly, over the years, I've grown to enjoy it. I've grown to enjoy the research process, the exploration process. I've come to learn one thing about myself, and that is that I love learning. And so if I'm working in one industry to help a client, I like to learn about that industry, and it's just as fun to turn around with a new client and learn about that industry. And so the research side really pays off in that regard.
That's really interesting and true. When you want to go for branding, you as a customer, as a company myself, I want to tell a story with the logo, and I want something to talk about it. So how do you go about that? Like you said, research. You sit with the client, you learn about them. So how do you bring that story to life? I think branding also involves not just a visual representation, but also that the story that comes along with the visual representation. So how do you go about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and again, it's not, when I say research, it's not necessarily just hopping on the web and diving into all the different facets. It is those conversations, sitting down with the client and getting to know them to a degree personally. Now, again, when I go back to what we talk about with personal branding, we really want to get to know who they are. But, if we're working with a bigger organization or someone, or I should say a business that's not really, let's say, branded with one particular figurehead or anything of that nature, then definitely just learning all that you can. It really helps to just have those conversations across the board.
That's true. So let us talk a little bit about project management now. So, I understand, not just development, but also design is treated as a project. And, you have this process, as you said, you have research, and then you share the first draft, and then you go through iterations. So how does, as a creative head yourself, how do you approach a project as a project manager? How do you define timelines? Because when it comes to design, I usually tell our clients, do not give me a deadline, because creative process takes time. Do not rush me. So, but they also have some commitments that they need to meet. So what do you want to tell the listeners and aspiring designers? How do they go about project management?
Well, we do our best to have a pretty good understanding of what our timeline looks like, what our flow looks like. As you mentioned, sometimes it can stretch in certain areas. Maybe the research takes a little bit longer. Maybe the exploration phase takes a little bit longer. But it really does help to have an understanding of what your process. And again, everybody can have their own individual process. A lot of folks, and particularly when I think back to the education side that I'm involved in, I'll go through and we'll teach our students, here's a generic process. And that generic process is one that I learned. But it's also one that I've customized, recognizing what fits for me. And I think everybody needs to find that for themselves, understanding, what it takes as far as research is concerned, understanding what it takes as far as exploration, how much time design can take. And then, of course, just even the back end, exporting out all the files, especially when it comes to logo design, figuring out all the different formats that the client might use and all the different versions of the logo, that sort of stuff takes time. So it's just a matter of, to some degree, just learning through craft, learning through practice, and then another degree, understanding yourself, understanding your team, and doing your best to develop a workflow and process. And of course, there's all sorts of digital tools today that can help with that. I know I've had experience with Notion, Slack, Asana. Those are really great for setting up those timeline processes and having an opportunity to go through and check off the process as you get through, letting everybody stay in the loop where you may be, where your colleague might be in terms of the process. And so I definitely recommend figuring out a tool that works for you. But as I said a moment ago, also just figuring out what you feel like your timeline needs to be, because it's just one of those things that you got to figure out for yourself.
That's true. So when you talk about that, I agree that only 50% comes with the process, but it's mostly the rest half of it is customized. So what do aspiring designers and branding and freelancers, a lot of people who run design agencies as well, going through iterations is a tough process. Sometimes we go through a couple of iterations, sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's endless. So how do you minimize those iterations? What steps do you take to minimize those iterations? And when do you go also how do you handle it without getting okay, that's it, I'm done. So how do you balance it and get there?
That's a tough one. As a designer, I could work on something forever. If you give me a logo project, I like this one. I like that one. And so I personally could have 100. I mean, I might be a little bit off on that number, but I could have a lot of iterations that I just do myself as I'm in the exploration phase. And then of course, as you hand it off for a client review, they're going to come back with some requests. They're going to come back likely with some changes that they'd like to see. And you kind of have to, and this is a tough one for entry-level designers, aspiring designers. It can can be tough to limit those iterations, but
Yeah.
in all honesty, it's something that you might need to do. You can, in your contract, in your initial contract, say, this is what you're going to pay me, and I'll give you 3 iterations. We'll start with the first couple. I'll give you a couple ideas at first. You choose one, and then we can iterate on this 3 to 5 times. And honestly, in some of our contracts, we put it in a scale. Like if you want to pay us this amount of money, we'll give you 5 iterations. If you want to pay us this amount of money, we'll give you 3 iterations. We actually kind of use it as a little bit of a I don't want to say a negotiating tactic, but when we're trying to work with a client to figure out what they want to pay, what their budget might be, we can find ways to maximize our time and efficiency as well. And so that's definitely a recommendation that I would throw in. And even if you are a junior designer and say, oh, I don't feel comfortable with doing that, honestly, it adds credibility. It makes you look like more professional if you're following that method of I know exactly what I'm doing, and this is what you're going to get for what you pay me.
That makes sense. I think a lot of people are scared to just put it because they are afraid that they'll lose the client. But I think it's important to limit that, because that gives the kind of feel to the client, as you said, what they want. Okay, I'm going to get this while I'm entering the contract. So
for sure. And everything that a client can know about your process, the more comfortable they're going to be working with you.
Right. Yeah. The more transparency is the best thing. Thanks.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we were talking about the iterations and the process, and you also mentioned the digital tools for project management. So we know that the design process, like the Apple logo, right from the Nike logo, everything was, I think, from what I've read in the news and in my early days, started with a pen and paper sketch. They were done like with the measurement and like straight lines, and it was basically a painting. Like painting, it started out with a pen and pencil, a brush, a sketch, a marker, and then then came the digital era, and then we have a lot of digital tools which can. So right now there are even a lot of SaaS tools that throw out logos. Like you put in the input, you put in the necessary keywords, you put in the field that you want, it throws out logos. So I have 2 questions. So which is better? I mean, using these tools, or you take the traditional approach? That's one. And then second, does this scare the designers? Because right now we have AI doing all this process. We work in technology, and we also know how to do it, and provided we can execute this way, the client gets more iterations. Like he gets 100 options when he enters this and this. So how does a designer need to take it as well?
Well, going back to the first question, I definitely think that there is still a need for designers to at least, let's put it this way, to make good design. And I certainly understand that some clients, they might not care. They might not want good design. They just feel like they need something. And so in some cases, they may want to just kind of pay for something out of a box. Okay, give me that, put my name on it. I'm good with it. And I'm not going to argue with those folks. If that's the entry level price that they want to pay, and they want the entry level work, if you will, that's certainly fine. And they can probably, succeed in their business with that sort of brand identity, if you will. But for folks that want to stand out, for organizations, businesses, and of course, even with personal branding, if you want to stand out, and if you want to be unique, if you want to be different in your market sector, then working with someone who's a specialist. I mean, everyone can appreciate working with a specialist, be it an electrician, an auto mechanic. It's no different with us on the design and the visual communication side. We're just specialists in this area. So if you want work that's going to work for you, then of course you're going to want to hire someone who's not necessarily going to give you something that looks so generic, something that can be unique. And again, that's another thing where a lot of folks might think, what they're getting is just a logo. But as we talked about a moment ago, the research, the process, the understanding, the relationships, that's also what you're getting when you work with a brand designer or any designer. You're getting that's value. And I feel like it is a big part of what we should be selling ourselves on, not just the final product.
Right.
Now, to the second part, when you mentioned particularly AI and some of the artwork that's being generated on that, I certainly think it's something that we need to be aware of and we need to be involved in. Number one, think it's fun. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting,
Yeah.
interesting evolution of what visual art and communication can look like. And again,
Right.
I don't think we should approach it with any sort of fear. Oh, it's going to take our jobs. But if we're in the forefront of that, if we're helping drive that technology to a degree, I mean, I'm not a coder. I don't know how to make that sort of stuff. But I have had an opportunity to engage with it over the last couple of weeks, and not so much from let's say a design perspective,
Right.
mostly from just generating art. Although I will say, if you're familiar with Chris Doe, and in the future, he's had some interesting posts on LinkedIn, and he actually has entered in some prompts that are a little bit more design related, not just creating art. He's been entering some things that have output some interesting things that do have a designerly touch to them, more of just the generative art that we've been seeing of late. So I definitely think it's something that we need to be aware of. I'm not worried about it eliminating designers, because even like I just said a moment ago, creating the art, that's just one aspect of what we do. It's all the other stuff that makes us extra
the
valuable.
research, the story that goes into it, the exploration, and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But it's cool. I love it, and I'm excited for the future of it.
So you think designers can use it as a tool to save the process?
Especially if it keeps evolving. Right now, much of what you see, it still kind of has a little bit of a glow or a little bit of a fuzz to it, where the details aren't quite there in some cases. But yeah, as it continues to get advanced, I think there's a real opportunity for us to potentially find ways to integrate it into what we do, and likely some unexpected ways that we just can't imagine right now.
Right. That's useful. That gives us some confidence for the designers as well. Yeah. Yeah. I think.
Well, it's just like any technology, if you're hesitant about it, or just get involved with it, learn about it and understand it, and then you'll find a way to capitalize on it for yourself.
That's true. That's nice. All right. So now talking about branding and design trends. So I've seen an interesting pattern in the evolving branding trend globally, like how Instagram started and Facebook with a 3D with an embossed logo feel, and then they got into a flat design, and then they now have a flat, but they're using a lot of gradients, in like their Instagram's logo, and even in the Meta logo, they have a flat version and then they have the gradient version. So, and then we saw a whole movement of logos turning into even more flat. Like they stopped using the font embossments, and they just went with the icon, and so it keeps evolving. And I feel like we're going back like a circle. We started with something that was very basic with a single line, and then we went into a glossy, and then we went into gradient, and then we're going back again to the same cycle. So what do you think is the next trend, or is this a cycle that's going to repeat itself in the future as well?
I honestly do. I feel like it is a cycle that will repeat, but of course, little things will find their way in that can make whatever's next a little bit more unique to the time. And of course, that's always going to be drawn from the culture. That's going to just be drawn from the technology, because especially if you look back just a few short years ago, and you look at logo design, icon design, particularly icon design for our digital displays, like our phones and the like, they were driving much of the design in terms of, let's say, the trends. And so again, it's all kind of going to contribute, I feel like, to whatever's next. But I do think that particularly with today and a little bit more of our flat design, for me personally, I can get behind that a little bit more, because I'm always a minimalist anyways. I'm always wanting to strip as much away as I can. So I kind of like it the best, even though, like I said, it's tough for me to say what might be next, but I just recognize that, of course, as folks get tired of flat design, they might bring back in a little bit more dimension to their work. And interestingly enough, even in today's trends, if you go to somewhere like Logo Lounge and you look at some of the work that's being published, there still is a lot of dimension that's being explored. And gradients are helping out with that. But it's just not so glossy and embossed like you mentioned a moment ago. So there's still a lot that can be done while still maintaining some sort of flat look and still giving you, or at least us designers, opportunity to create work that can work across the board. It can look great on a digital display, that can work good in print, even in black and white. And so that flat really kind of helps do that, but there's still a lot of opportunity for dimension, if you will.
That's great. Oh, that's very useful, Josh. I have just one fun question I just wanted to add to this. So if you want to go back in time and then design a large logo to credit for yourself, which logo would you have designed for a popular brand? It can be anything like Nike or Adidas or whichever. What would the logo that's something that I would design. I would have done it.
Gosh, it's tough for me to pinpoint just one. But I look back at the work of folks like Paul Rand, and so much, again, going back to minimalism, going back to, I guess, this kind of idea of flat, his work is always someone that I can always pull inspiration from. And it's tough to say one individual one that he would have worked on, most because my brain's not allowing me to think of one individual right now.
That's okay.
But those early, I shouldn't say early, but the logo designers from that era, and even going way back, because as a student of design, I love design history, and so going way back to where the concept of an actual icon or a logo was really starting to be birthed, at least for, let's say, industry. And I apologize, I can't remember the designer's name, but there's an AEG logo that kind of has some honeycomb to it, and that's always been one that I've just had a real love for. But I can't remember his name right now because
that's all right. That's awesome. I think the viewers will Google that and definitely have a look at the history as well. Yeah. And that was awesome, Josh. Thanks a lot. So one final personal question for me. So what's one personal branding tip that you would give for all of us? Number one, to do it. You find so many folks that are like, well, I'm a designer, and they'll say it, which is a big part of it, saying, oh, I love doing design, I love creating design, I'm a designer, it's what I want to do. But you got to show it as well. Make your own logo, which I've been terrible at off and on throughout my career. Color has always been something that I've been drawn to. So it's been easy for me with my personal brand to kind of have my color on my website, the color on my different social media profiles. But it's just a matter of really just doing it and making sure that it reflects you, making sure that it reflects your spirit, your personality. That's what we love doing for other folks. It's hard to do it for ourselves sometimes, but it is necessary. And then once you have it, use it. Once you've got that personal brand out there, create content like this podcast. Make sure your LinkedIn is up and running well. Make sure that you're sharing content, creating content. I know that's a full-time job in and of itself. It's like, I just want to design, but sometimes you got to communicate on behalf of yourself as well. And it's something that I definitely try to push with our students here at the college. It's something that I and my wife push with Best Branding Solutions. And it's something that, again, as far as design goes, I'm definitely passionate about that side of design, as much for myself, but as much for everybody else. That's fantastic, Josh. I think it was a very important part of personal branding, and you've been amazing in this podcast. Thanks a lot for accepting to be on this podcast. I think you've given a lot of useful nuggets for the viewers and for myself to ponder about and think about when it comes to design. And I definitely look forward to more. And for the viewers, I'll leave Josh LinkedIn profile link in the description, as well as Best Branding Solutions. If you need personal branding, I think you can reach out to them, and you can see the energy and passion that Josh has for design and branding. And I think he's gonna deliver no less than excellence. Thanks a lot, Josh.
Thank you. I appreciate it.